Thank you today. I'm Cameron Curtis, sales leader at Alchemy Security. We are very excited to talk to you today about maximizing the defender's advantage with Alchemy Security and Splunk. There really just is a common belief in the cybersecurity community that we live in a world where the attackers always have the advantage. And really that's just a defeatist in nature. Doesn't really reflect the reality that is possible to identify and maximize your defender's advantage. Now, this isn't a new concept, but it's really been something that we've decided to dust off a little bit and put our own spin on it. And we're excited to share that with you today and how we're helping our customers build that defender's advantage. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Joe Bonnell. He's our fearless leader, founder, and CEO. To talk to you about the defender's advantage.
All right, thanks Cam, and thanks everybody that's joined the webinar this morning. As Cam mentioned, my name is Joe Bonnell, founder of the company. This talk really kind of reflects the collective wisdom and experiences I've garnered along the way that to just help organizations do better faster. Is kind of what we like to say around here. And so when we're talking about do better faster, we're looking for ways that the doing better part is how do we do better in this field, and then the faster is how do we get more efficient about what we do to maximize our and optimize our security spend. So so this talk is really a reflection of just all of that in my years as being a practitioner running red teams back at IBM back in the day. Spent a lot of time doing assessment work where I had the opportunity to see just the types of challenges that organizations would face over and over again and struggle. And as a result of that, that has shaped and informed our thinking, and some of which we're going to show you here today. So with that, I'm going to kill my video and so you can more focus on what I'm saying, and which is really the most important part here. So with that, let's go ahead and get things started. Looks like everybody can hear me okay. So with that, I will jump right into things. All right, so goals of this talk. I'm going to take a moment just to recap the challenges and get you to try to think a little bit differently than maybe the ways that we traditionally think about cybersecurity. Take a stab at defining the defender's advantage in the context of cybersecurity, and it's important to do that, I think. This concept, as you heard Cameron mention, has been around for quite some time, and if you talk to people that are kind of more well-versed or have experience in traditional kind of warfare techniques, having a defender's advantage can mean something very specific, and we're looking to kind of broaden that context to what we mean here in the field of cybersecurity. And then, and if we're doing this right today, I'm helping to illuminate why we do what we do, why we focus on helping customers in the way that we do, both with our premium applications on top of Splunk and our other managed and professional services that we provide as part of our solutions landscape. All right, so jumping in, I've gotten fond lately of saying that there's three truths in the world. You can't escape death, taxes, or data breaches. And I know that this information is probably not new to anybody on this call today, but I think the important part here to recognize is that I've been doing this for over 20 plus years now. I've been in the field for a long time. I've seen it. I've seen the vantage points from many different angles. And if there's something that is so self-evident and truthful, is this problem is going to continue to get worse for the foreseeable future. And we're going to keep spending more on it every year, as you can see here by this graph provided by Gartner on the global cybersecurity spend dating back to 2012. So this is just a problem that's going to be pervasive for quite some time. And it's just really incumbent upon organizations, really around the world to do the things that they need to do to best protect themselves against cyber criminals and what they do all day long. All right, so, and I really feel like at this point in my career and seeing, a lot of other people that have been around as long as I have, getting a little tired, right? And there's the old adage that, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing, the same ways and expecting a different outcome. And based upon that previous slide, it's pretty clear that, we continue in many respects to do the same things, expecting a different outcome. And, and I feel like it's just that point in time where it's time to reshape and reframe this conversation a little bit. And, it started with just me challenging my own thinking on this topic and reflecting on some of the customer challenges that we saw, particularly with the Log4j event and how people had to respond to that. And that really, in some respects, is what started all this journey. And, we don't want to do it because, we're just the bad security guys being the Department of No all the time. We know that that exists. I'm certainly appreciative of and empathetic of that view. And if we're actually doing our job right, we're not the Department of No. We're actually enabling businesses to move faster while securing the things that matter most to that organization. One thing that I think is important to just call out here as part of this driver to reshape the conversation, I think a lot of organizations just historically decided that they were not going to worry about all the cybersecurity stuff. They just get some cyber insurance and call it a day. And over the past, I'd say probably 4 to 6 quarters, that dynamic has started to change. And part of it's been a result of the cost and premiums, as you see here, continuing to jump every quarter. And we've heard this over and over again from customers, and we've seen it ourselves. And this has resulted in some people starting to question whether cyber insurance makes sense for them or not from a spend. And the other big thing that's happened over the past 4 to 6 quarters, maybe 2 years, is underwriters are now requiring organizations to do things. And those controls are actually pretty stringent. So for that organization that really didn't want to do anything before, and they were just going to outsource the risk to cyber insurance providers, well, that dynamic has changed. And so if this is where your mindset was before, you're going to have to adapt. Either by, if you're going to maintain that cyber insurance, you're going to have to do the things that you need to do to make sure that that policy will pay out. Or if you decide to put cyber insurance on the shelf for a minute, you should absolutely be taking those investments that you would otherwise make in cyber insurance and doing the things that they would expect you to do anyway to reduce your residual risk of being compromised by a threat actor. All right. Now, me, I'm an OG guy. I've been around for a long time. I've, kind of grew up in that classical roots of learning about the topics and things that drive information security and how we think about it. And so, using the CIA triad that was developed in the 70s to characterize asset criticality, whether that's an IT asset, an information asset, or your people, because your people are just as important as those other two things that I just mentioned. And so having this concept of being able to classify assets by, the confidentiality or the integrity or the availability has been something that we've had for a long, long time. Nothing new there. This whole concept of this iterative loop process of identifying, protect, detect, respond, and recover, and having those capabilities has also been around a long time. And that actually, this kind of iterative loop is what all of these different security controls frameworks really just enumerate in their own way. Whether it is and it might be that some are more focused on threat identification or vulnerability identification, asset identification. Others maybe hone in on preventative controls or recovery. But at the end of the day, all these different frameworks just kind of comprise these two main points. You know, one of the failures that we see with most of these frameworks is there's no prioritization to how you distribute security controls. And, and as a result, you know, throughout my years, particularly when I did a lot of assessment work, and for people who have done a lot of assessment work and traveled the world and looked at different organizations, small, medium, large, extra large, and everything in between, and reviewing them to either like the ISO 27000 series standards, which I used to do PCI gap assessments and PCI assessments at one point in my career. I was a QSA. Um, you learn a lot about the failures, and you learn a lot about why organizations fall over when they get a serious push by the big bad wolf. And so, again, you know, this kind of thinking has been the way we've driven our security strategy in aggregate. And I'm not here to say that this has been bad, but you know, these controls frameworks, they don't have any prioritization. So when I would go out and assess these organizations, what I would find is they were mostly doing everything kind of poor. There was no strategy of what they're going to focus on first or second. There's no consideration for how you can quantitatively reduce your risk in any of these standards except for one. And I'm going to be telling you about that here in a little bit. And then, of course, we have compliance with PCI, HIPAA, and these other things where we have to protect ourselves to make sure that you know, we're in line and adhering to the compliance community, whether you're taking credit cards or processing patient private information, that sort of thing. So this has been the world that we've been living in, and I'm not trying to belabor the point, but I need to belabor the point, is that this is the way we've been thinking about it for a long time. And you know, as the events have unfolded on the world stage, and I started really this journey of trying to better understand how information or traditional warfare might apply to cyber, it got me rethinking some things. And one of the things I realized that, you know, while security controls frameworks are great, without considering it in the context of what your risk profile is as an organization and who might be your attacker, that can be a point of frustration in that um, you can't actually see or you can't really react to the and prioritize your approach in a way that optimizes your security spend. And I'll be jumping this into a little bit detail in just a moment. So, but first up, I'm going to talk about something I think we can all relate to. Everybody's got their favorite sports. And the thing that I think you need to ask yourself when it comes to coaching these teams, and whether it's football or hockey or baseball or race car teams, um, there's one thing that all of these coaches have to do to be strategically ready for the big day. And that is they have to spend time understanding what are the strengths and weaknesses of the team, and then what are the strengths and weaknesses of your adversary. And this is an ongoing, evolving thing, right? So every week, or if you're in the hockey business, you're playing more than once a week, which is why I love hockey so much. Those guys are just nuts. But every week, they're having to constantly recalibrate based upon this ever-changing set of what comprises the strengths and weaknesses of the team and what comprises the strengths and weaknesses of your opponent. And this is a fundamental point that I'm going to be reiterating in some other ways here in just a moment. So as mentioned, you know, I've spent a lot of time kind of digging deep into traditional warfare techniques and what that means and how that could map to cyber. And that took me to some interesting places. And it ultimately wrote, you know, all roads in many respects, when you want to understand more about traditional warfare, all roads kind of lead back to what many kind of characterizes as the godfather of conflict strategy. And the man's name was Sun Tzu, and he wrote a book about 500 BC, if I recall correctly, called The Art of War. And Sun Tzu is considered to be a brilliant general, strategist, military philosopher, and writer. And the book is often cited as a masterpiece by generals and theorists. And in it, he presents this philosophy of war for how you manage conflicts and how you win battles. And at the end of the day, that is exactly what we're trying to do here, right? When you think about it, we're trying to best position ourselves to be prepared and to come out on top when our adversaries are attempting to do harm to our organizations. Unfortunately, Sun Tzu's kind of gotten picked up in the marketing aspects of cybersecurity as well. And I bring that up because I know there's some people out there going, oh, we're bringing up the Sun Tzu thing again. Now, I'm just here to say that just because other marketing teams are using that doesn't mean that Sun Tzu wasn't right. We can't devalue the main points that he's made in this book and that have become the cornerstone of warfare strategies for thousands of years now. All right. Now, you heard Cameron mention it at the top of the call, this concept of it's not a matter of if, but when, and this kind of defeatist attitude that I often hear among my peers in the industry because they've seen so much. And after a while, and you see the failures over and over again, you can start to get jaded. You can start to not really, you start to get this kind of defeatist attitude, and I've seen it over and over again, and it's unfortunate to see because the intent and the goal of all of these practitioners is the opposite. And so one of the first things we have to do is really kind of switch it around here for ourselves. And, so I'm going to share some quotes within the Art of War that it really serves as the basis in my mind for how you achieve a defender's advantage. So to start with, he talked about, if you know your enemy, so if you know your adversary and you know yourself, you need not be afraid of 100 battles. That you're going to be mentally prepared, and that if you really understand your enemy, you understand your opponent, you understand your adversary, and you understand yourself and the weaknesses and strengths of both of those, then you're going to have a pretty good mental game on what's going down. And it's just a matter of preparing and executing to cover those areas of weakness and to diminish your opponent's strengths. One of the next things he shared was that if you know yourself but not the enemy, so if you got a good handle on what's going around in your environment, which I would challenge most people don't, but you don't understand your adversary at all, for every win, you're also going to lose one. And we see a lot of this where organizations have a pretty decent handle on what might be going on within their infrastructure, but they haven't really considered it in terms of a threat and who that threat actor might be. If you know neither your enemy nor yourself, you're going to succumb every time. And so, and these are the organizations that we read about. Like there's a Twitter account I follow, Ransomware News, and just every couple of hours, you'll see somebody else pop up that has been subjected to a ransomware incident by the attacker, and they're announcing it on Twitter. And this thing, it just never stops. And just like I mentioned in that previous slide. So those are the people that aren't paying attention to either one of these, for sure. And lastly, to win 100 victories in 100 battles is not the acme of skill. Sun Tzu's main point was that the best fight is no fight at all. And there are ways that you can help yourselves execute on that. because at the end of the day, hackers are lazy. They, if their interest is in retail for whatever reason, and they start to probe you and 3 or 5 other companies, and you're the rock from whichever angle they start to probe, they're going to move on to the other 4. And that's the idea here. And this can absolutely be something that can shape our thinking and shape our strategy as we move this ball down the road. All right. So I want to take a shot at defending or defining the vendor's advantage in the context of cyber. Just knowing that that this concept can connote other things to people that have experiences in kind of traditional warfare. So when you go look up the words in Oxford, esteemed Oxford Dictionary, pretty straightforward. A defender is a person who defends someone or something. That represents us as cybersecurity practitioners and the people that we have to delegate to, our users and our leadership, to help them understand that we all need to pull on the same side of the rope. And then, in terms of advantage, a condition or circumstance that puts one in a favorable or superior position. So if you're a defender and you can find yourself in a place where you have a favorable or superior position, then by default, you have a defender's advantage. And this is a new concept. I mean, when I started socializing this with people in the field, I got a lot of yeah, no. And I'm convinced absolutely otherwise at this point for reasons that I'm going to try to articulate today. So in traditional warfare, conventional warfare, it's generally accepted that a defending force has a 3-to-1 advantage over an attacker. And I've heard stories of like if you actually had the castle and the walls, that your advantage was actually 10-to-1. So in other words, for every 100 defenders, you could battle and effectively hold off 1,000 attackers in this castle-like environment. And and I've come to the conclusion that not only is it possible to have a defender's advantage in the cyber domain, that the kind of leverage that we get is probably closer. It's absolutely more than 3-to-1. Because if it was that low, organizations would be getting popped all day long, and that's just not happening. We're definitely seeing lots of breaches, but when you think about it, the number of people that are actually doing this on the world from an offense standpoint is not that large when you actually come to think about it. But the attackers that are out there have gotten really effective at what they do. And so I'm convinced it's probably more to 10-to-1 that we as cyber defenders can get that advantage if we're able to effectively execute on the things that we know that we need to do. So what are the characteristics required to have a defender's advantage? It really comes down to this concept I've shared a couple of times now. I know if I say it 3 times, hopefully it'll stick, is that understanding your organization's strengths and weaknesses, understanding your adversarial strengths and weaknesses, and then applying the necessary resources required to minimize your weaknesses and your adversary strengths. Because if you're able to do that, then you're in a pretty good spot to have that defender's advantage, which we need so desperately in these times. So with that, I will just kind of reiterate what Cam also said at the top of the call. If you have any thoughts or perspective on things that I'm sharing here, if you want to just drop that in the question window, I can see that, and I will respond accordingly. So with that, let me start with where we start. All right. Now, there's 2 ways we can obviously look at this. We can look at this from the attacker standpoint, or we can look at from the defense standpoint. And historically, as an organization, we've been focusing here on the defense side, which is obviously completely appropriate. But without understanding our attacker, their motivations, what their tools, tactics, and techniques are, we're going to be stuck here doing this infinite loop of what we've been doing without adapting, and that's a super important part of obtaining a defender's advantage. So the reality is what we need to start with is our attackers, and basically the adversary, the way we characterize studying our attackers is in the is what we describe as adversarial analysis. And so with adversarial analysis, I'm not going to get into the weeds with all this, but just to kind of give you an idea of how this works, right? When it comes to threat actors, there's really only kind of 6 major categories that the FBI Cyber Division was really able to put their arms around. And so, and they have different motivations and different goals. And so if you can take a moment and think about your organization and the way it is and what you do, then you can start to understand what your threat actor profile looks like, which can vastly inform what you do and why you do it, and what's going to be the required spend to get there. So let's just walk through just a couple examples real quick. So if you're an arts and crafts manufacturer, hacktivism is probably not going to be a big thing for you unless you've somehow gotten engaged in political causes or something that could make somebody mad, and then they're going to want to try to do you harm in some way. But for the most part, if you're in the arts and crafts field, probably not a lot of hacktivism going on. Now, cyber criminal activity, 100%. Every business, every category, every vertical, every nonprofit, every do-gooder, every bad gooder, no, bad doer, there you go, is subject to cybercrime. So that's kind of goes for everybody. Insider threat was something that we didn't used to worry about so much. It kind of came and went. I mean, in the earlier Verizon business data breach reports, all of a sudden, insider threat was a big deal, and then it wasn't, and now, we have to at least be mindful of it, because what we've learned over time is that these cyber criminals are actually targeting people within organizations to help them collaborate on the crime. And if they collaborate, there could be a payout for the insider and obviously a payout for the criminal. So that's kind of reared its ugly head again in a little bit of a bigger way. Espionage, probably not such a big deal for arts and crafts manufacturer. When you're talking about arts and crafts, these are things that you can see and feel and touch. And if you really want to replicate it, you could just do some 3D imaging and you're right there. Terrorism, obviously not an issue, not really going to be an interest of nation state actors. So, but if you start to think about these different organizations, so if you're in the business of developing guidance systems for the defense industry, your threat profile is going to be probably include all of them, right? If you're a grocery store chain, cybercrime, insider threat, probably, yeah. And I had to actually think about this one for a minute because, with recent events, it's become more clear that, supply chain attacks can be wildly effective. And so if you are a terrorist and you understand that, it actually might change the threat profile of if you're a grocery store chain. If you're in the biomedical engineering space or any space where you have lots of intellectual property, you might be a target for nation state espionage, because there's a lot of companies that are in different parts of the world that, rather than just trying to reverse engineer your technology, if they could just download the plans because you've got them sitting on an unprotected server somewhere in your network, they're going to do that. So the bad gooder is now forever my cyber lexicon. Oh, thanks so much, Chris. That's hilarious. That's great. All right. So, and then sports and entertainment. When we think of sports entertainment, we can think about a lot of things, right? But if you're in the cyber crimes, certainly a candidate. But if you have if you're very high profile, right, it might be something where you could and maybe should be thinking about potential terrorist events, knowing that that can happen in the cyber domain just as easily as in the quote real world. So this is how we think about threat actors. And so, in what I've just shown you here is a very quick way to get more targeted about how you're thinking about who's doing what. And the reason why that's important is once you understand that, this is kind of an older diagram from Rand Corp, but I liked it in that it fairly well enumerated that, that cyber terrorists are going to have different motivations, techniques, and types of targets that they're after versus hacktivists or state-sponsored actors versus cyber criminals. So again, once you understand your adversary, you can start to get more focused on what that means and how that's important to you. Their motivations, like I mentioned, everybody's pretty much interested in financial crime or financial gain through crime, and so these two bullet points here on the left are from the Verizon Business Data Breach Report, and as you can see, financial gain is the primary motivator for larger organizations. Hacktivism starts to become more of a meaningful threat in that large organizations often get the ire up of people, and people want to respond and do things to make points. But by and large, ransomware and crimeware in general is the ongoing and pervasive threat across organizations of all types. You can see Verizon didn't get it quite right in the early days, but they kind of right the ship there in terms of recognizing the pervasive and ongoing threat that ransomware is. And I found this interesting data point from CloudWords. They did a study that said ransomware will cost the world, it cost the world $20 billion in 2021. That's a lot of money, $20 billion. And that number is expected to rise 13-fold to $265 billion by 2031, which is just absolutely insane. When I first thought of it, when I first read that, I was like, oh, this is maybe a little bit sensational. And I came to realize that's actually, no, it's just math. And, if we're $20 billion today and we continue to see the growth rates that we've seen, particularly in ransomware, that's where we're going to be. And they made a point that recovering from a ransomware attack cost businesses 185 million or 1.85 million, pardon me, on average. And maybe your organization can sustain that kind of cost structure. But I can guarantee you, whether you can afford the bill or not, this is a huge distraction to leadership. It's a huge distraction, all kinds of ways. It gets you focused on the wrong things because at that point, you're dead in the water if you are being subjected to a ransomware attack. Just very quickly, their tactics, it's good to understand attackers' tactics so we know what they're doing and how they're doing it. Again, from the Verizon Business Data Breach Report on the left here, they note that there are 4 key paths leading to your state: credential theft, phishing, exploiting vulnerabilities, and botnets. We see that through everything. All these different threat actors are basically using these same techniques. So that now that we understand that, our customers can take better countermeasures to protect themselves against credential theft, phishing, and vulnerability exploitation. And with that kind of botnet problem, it gets taken care of too. So that's point one. Point two is this the study I found from Osterman Research, and it was more focused on phishing and ransomware, knowing that these are just such pervasive within the field right now. And when they looked at the type of security incidents, the trend became very clear very quickly. Tricking or phishing are variations on social engineering. So social engineering continues to be a top approach where attackers get into environments, and then of course ransomware. So this is back of the napkin math here to help you understand why you should be focused on these things. One quick point on vulnerability exploitation. So for our customers, they know and they receive all kinds of threat advisories for things that we think have the potential to be a big deal. Log4j was one of those threat advisories that we kicked out last year, and boy, that was the one that caught a lot of people sideways. A lot of vendors did not respond quick enough to allow customers to respond quick enough to patch systems that were available on the internet that resulted in some long days. Fortunately, nothing big happened in any of those instances, but they got a toehold and we had to go kick them out. So the big point here is look at the compressed timelines. They're starting to see exploitation in the wild on the 9th. It was disclosed in late November, right about now, as we're heading into breach season. And it took less than a month to weaponize this vulnerability across all these different threat actors. So this compression of time with vulnerabilities is something to recognize. And what that means to you is that you got to be fast on the draw and managing your vulnerabilities, especially with internet-facing systems. And if you can't manage it, you got to find another compensating control. And that can be better security architecture. It could be enhanced monitoring. There's lots of ways to get there, but this is going to be a problem, and this time compression is only going to get more so over time. There's lots of collaboration going on in the Black Hat community, much to the dismay of all of us blue team defenders. Okay, so I've done a pretty good job, I think, of articulating how you study your adversary. Now I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about how we understand ourselves. Because if we don't understand ourselves, for every battle we win, we're going to lose one too. There's lots of ways to think about this. I liked the SWOT analysis context because this is, again, something that I think everybody's pretty familiar with and you get your arms around. The idea being understanding what your strengths are and your advantages over your adversaries. Again, what are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities for improvement, either with existing technologies, process, procedures, frameworks, et cetera, or new technologies or new ways of doing things, and then your threats and how that maps and all this. So my goal here is to help you guys think about this in more focused ways, to develop more of a simple but well-informed strategy when it comes to protecting yourselves to these different types of threat actors. So, and the first thing that we want to stop doing is trying to do everything at the same time. That is not going to happen. It's going to result in just having multiple weak links in the chain fence all over the place. That's not what we want. We want to start with what we know to be the most likely point of entry and shoring that up and working outwards from there. Which means we got to get really focused on what our priorities are. And we need to have the optics. We need to have the optics, the ability to see the forest from the trees, the ability to hone in on that little detail that looks real far away, and then that ability to pull out and see everything in aggregate. And this is why we actually use Splunk as a technology set, because it's the best at allowing us to do that at scale. And then lastly, understanding why you're doing what you're doing. And I'm gonna jump into that here now. All right, so shaping your battlefield. So in order to shape your battlefield, to have that defender's advantage, that means that you have to have an understanding of home team capabilities. What do we know about the IT landscape? Are there potentials for hidden blind spots, things that we don't even know about? Because that in and of itself is a problem that starts to kind of manifest itself in bigger ways over time. What are the strengths in your network security architecture, and what are your weaknesses? And then how is the organization prepared to thwart ongoing social engineering attempts, knowing that that is one of the top ways that attackers are getting into environments? And then once you understand those things, how do you compensate for them? How do you diminish your adversarial strengths? And then understanding how deception enters into your overall strategy. And then the most important point here is, to what bar do you measure your strengths and weaknesses in this context that I've kind of laid out in this conversation? What's the best yardstick to look at? And so we're going to jump into that now. So I'm going to let you guys in on what I characterize as the best kept secret in cybersecurity. If you have not really dug into the latest iteration of the CIS Critical Security Controls Framework, you are in for a great surprise. So the the thing that they did differently and that they're doing differently that is informing thinking is they took, what they they studied the Verizon Business Data Breach Report. They studied these other reports. They studied to understand how threat actors are getting into environments and then making sure that they're developing controls in this framework that will directly address that. And one of the things that they said in their Community Defense Model 2.0 paper is so the CIS framework, for those that don't know, the IG1, the implementation group 1 control set has approximately 56 safeguards. And so, and those 56 safeguards are meant to cover all kinds of threats. And so they're saying if you adopt and can successfully implement in a repeatable way these 56 safeguards, then you will have reduced your attack surface for malware by 77%, as measured by the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is the kind of technical way of describing how threat actors are doing what they're doing and how you want to prevent it. Ransomware 78%, web application hacking, insider privilege misuse, target intrusion. So if you just do those 56 things and you can get them into a mature, repeatable state, you're really moving the needle on what are the top 5 categories of attacks that all these different threat actors are using. And if you go the needle, if you move the needle all the way, the CIS framework has about 153, I think, safeguards in aggregate. And if you adopt all those and get them to a mature, repeatable place, you vastly reduce your attack surface to not nil, because things are going to happen. You could do all this and you're still going to have issues, but your likelihood of those issues becoming big incidents is vastly reduced because you've implemented this cross-domain level of controls across the organization. Okay, and so how do you measure that? How do you measure where you're at with these various controls against these different threats? And the way that we help our customers with that is a product that we've launched called Lapis. And Lapis is designed to do a couple of things. The first and foremost is to track in great detail what is our defensive posture looking like across these different security functions of detect, identify, protect, recover, and respond against these different asset types of applications, data, devices, enterprise network, and users. And then how does all that roll up? And so the way we score this is that for any safeguard, you can give it a 0 to 5 ranking. And we adopted the Carnegie Mellon maturity model as inspiration for what we've kind of co-opted into what we're now characterizing as the Alchemy security maturity model. And the idea here is that if it's a 0, then you've got 0 capabilities around that particular safeguard. If you wanted to stop it today, you can't because you don't have that capability in place. If you're giving yourself a 1, or if we're doing the assessment, we're giving you a 1, that means that you can kind of do it in an ad hoc way, but that's about it. If you're getting a ranking of a 2, that means that you've got a repeatable process. A 3 means it's repeatable and documented. A 4, that you're taking a data-driven approach to that particular safeguard. Or a 5 means that you're constantly self-improving on that particular safeguard. So that's how the scoring system works, and you can start to see how powerful this can be, knowing that with Splunk we can start to filter down in different ways to really hone in on what we're looking to get in terms of visibility at both the. So this is the scene, the forest from the trees, and then we can jump right into that view of getting closer to the trees. So knowing that the Center for Internet Security adopted these different attack types and defined those and the safeguards with that within Lapis, if your primary concern is ransomware, which everybody should be anyway, you can very quickly filter on that and then see what is your current situational state relative to the critical controls required to prevent a ransomware attack. And then use this as a tool set to communicate upwards with your leadership as to why you have the assessment that you have. And this takes the kind of agenda-driven things that we often see when we're talking to people about funding, And it just makes everything data driven at that point and much easier to do. So this is how we see the forest. When we one of the things that we've seen over and over again, and one of the reasons why we built a workflow automation into Lapis is time and again when I go out and assess companies, I would see them failing at the easy things, the things that they were supposed to be doing on a annual, biannual, quarterly, monthly, weekly, and daily basis. And so with Lapis, one of the things that we're getting very excited to announce here is the implementation of workflow automation, to where you can go into the tool set and actually configure when you get notified to go do that thing. So you've got this ability to track your controls in a somewhat of an automagic way. So we can open your case management system, we can open it in ours, but giving these our customers this ability to kind of repeatedly do the things that need to be done, because we know when they don't do it, breaches happen. And we know that most people don't do it because they don't have a good strategy around workflow to make sure that they're doing the things that they need to be doing on these different periodic bases to make sure that those controls are in check. All right. So when it comes to honing in, seeing the trees, there's lots of different ways to do that. We developed a product called Atom, which is an asset discovery and inventory management tool. It's a very powerful tool. It can identify assets either by active scanning. It can identify assets with passive means too, as long as we have the logs to do it. And then we allow you to enrich the data with your compliance requirements, the asset criticality, where does it fall in the CIA triad, what kind of vulnerabilities does that device have. So you can start, once you start to improve your asset inventory, which everybody struggles with, I'm here to say, small, medium, large, extra large, they all struggle with it. This is the way that we can help them get to see the forest and the trees using Splunk. I'm not going to go into all these details, but we can obviously show what kinds of applications are installed, services detected, processes detected, ports listing, scheduled tasks. This is, by definition, looking right in the trees. And this is the power of Splunk and things that we can do with our imagination here at Alchemy Security. And then, of course, dialing down right into the vulnerabilities on that particular device. So now, if we've got a customer that has a new exploit comes out and they have Atom deployed, they could very quickly just go through this keyword search, and look for those applications deployed with that particular version, so they know where to patch very quickly. Atom can give you a lot of other information too that I'm not going into today, but I've made the main points here. So very quickly, just going to touch on layer 8, the human factor. As I've mentioned a couple of times now, you can take a data-driven approach to this too. If you are observing who are your most phish-prone groups, whether it's client services or financial services, so you recognize you got some vulnerabilities there, you can also take your threat data out of your email protection and observe which ones are your most critical or your most targeted groups. So you can see here that in client services is one of the top targeted groups and also most vulnerable to phishing. So just taking this data and combining it together, this gives us that vantage point and view to be able to do a good vulnerability analysis that you can respond to in an effective way. And I'm not going to go into deception today. There's a lot to talk about here, but deception absolutely plays a part in it. Attackers use deception all day long, and we need to be using deception in more thoughtful ways with our customers, knowing that deception can drive so much benefit on the other side of that without a lot of cost involved. So kind of summing all this up, if you're able to consolidate all this information between the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, then you have a pretty good idea of what your defender's advantage looks like. And at that point, I'm not going to say that you're going to be able to have an advantage over all adversaries. There are some adversaries that if they really want to get in, they're going to go work for you, or they're going to have somebody work for you. I mean, there's some very motivated people that if they're very motivated, they're going to find a way in. But for the people that are just a little less interesting, if you understand your threats, threat actors and their capabilities, understand your own IT landscape and how threats map to it, and then you drive the results necessary using these techniques that I've described here today, and you allow those viewpoints to be informed by strong optics and analytical support. This is super important. You're going to be past that point of it's not a matter of if, but when, into a point where you feel better prepared to deal with data breaches. Last thing I want to close with here, I've talked about Sun Tzu. I'm going to kind of go the different direction for a minute. This man is, his name is Jim Butcher. He's a noted author and fellow Coloradan resident. And he's a self-admitted bag guitarist and gaming enthusiast who's probably best known for this quote, which is, you don't have to run faster than the bear to get away. You just have to run faster than the guy next to you. And it's so true. And I appreciate Jim for sharing those words. And with that, I will open it up for a couple of questions.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Joe. Well done. Thanks for going through all of that. A couple of questions that came up here. First one, can you give an example of how we can use deception to our advantage?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the simplest examples I can think of is having fake employees on LinkedIn that have really juicy titles, and that you start monitoring their communications and who's hitting you and why. That is a very interesting, cheap, and effective way to see if you're being targeted, and have that threat intel as a result of having somebody that is if that person's being targeted, it kind of works as the classic honeypot, but with social media. Another quick example of what we use with our customers regularly is what we describe as honeypots. So honeypots can serve a lot of different functions, but the way we typically like to rely on it is having these systems sprinkled throughout our customer environments, and it's like a tripwire, right? They run across the tripwire. Attackers trying to enumerate the network. And if they run across our device, the sole purpose is to have things connect to it, and then we start asking questions why, is another great example of how you can use deception to inform your defense and potential offensive moves.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Here's another question. Is there a best starting place to start shoring things up? Should you start with the CIS controls?
Yes. At this point, I've done the math. We've looked at all these things because, when we were developing Lapis, we had customers that are using this. We have customers that like ISO for various reasons. And, and it forced me as a practitioner to go just take a fresh look at all these things. And as mentioned before, the CIS is really the only framework that does what we need it to do. That where we can hone in on these specific threat types and then understand what exactly do we need to do to protect ourselves, if nothing else, against those major threat categories, knowing that if we can move the needle on all the safeguards that are attached with this particular asset type, threat category, then we're in a much better position than we were before.
Excellent. Okay, a couple more here. There was a question about, are the slides available for download? We will be able to put something together for that, but we'll also be sending out a copy of the recording to all attendees or anyone that's registered for our webinar here. A couple more questions. If I have Splunk, do you license the premium apps separately, or do I have to have your service?
100%. I'm here to make a difference. I'm here to make a mark, and this is our approach to making a mark. And it's one of the reasons why there's lots of reasons why we pick Splunk that I'm not going to talk about today. But the big thing is knowing that there's so many organizations out there that have Splunk. There's such a huge install base and all this data, and there's more coming behind Lapis that I'm not covering today. But really having the power of Splunk available to us to be able to organize the data in such a way to where we can, go from the forest to the trees, back to the forest again, is something that was super important to us and is available as a standalone SaaS service that can connect directly to your Splunk environment and help you off to the races with this.
Okay. All right. Well, that is all the time we have today. We're 1 minute over. Again, thank you all for attending our webinar. We will be sending out a copy of the recording, and I'll see what I can do about getting these slides available for download as well. Everyone have an excellent rest of the week. And if there's ever anything we can do to help you, please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and best of luck as we head into the holiday and breach season. Take care.